Yo, in this video, we're gonna explore the differences between short-term and long-term stress, aka acute and chronic stress. We're gonna go into a bit the impacts that has on your body and your mind, and then I'm gonna share actionable tips to help you better cope and manage stress, and to elevate you closer to self-mastery. Stay tuned, and thank you for staying tuned, baby. In 2023, my stress levels were skyrocketing, being recently heartbroken by somebody you thought you were going to spend your whole life with, living out of my car, and recently getting arrested for a DUI charge. Just when I thought things could have gotten worse, my makeshift home breaks down, plunging me into a dark abyss of depression. Emotionally and mentally shattered, I was drowning in a sea of hopelessness, shame, and disappointment. My stress levels soared, triggering random bouts of tears, self-imposed starvation, and a dangerous cycle of drinking. Little did I know, this dark depression was only the beginning of my journey. We're gonna get into it. I'm gonna go into each one. I'm gonna go into the short-term stress with short-term stress that I practice and continuously practice. Then we're gonna dive into the chronic stress, the aka long-term stress. We're gonna get into the causes of that, the symptoms, and then tips and practices to help you manage it long-term wise. So look at the differences between short-term stress and long-term stress. Short-term stress, acute stress that is experienced on a daily basis. Might it come from a traffic jam when you get in the car when you're rushing to work? Might it be you spilling some coffee on your shirt potentially when you're on your way to work? It could be a feud you had with your sibling or your parent or your partner. It's those things that happen to us daily. It could also be deadlines. Symptoms of good stress would be fight or flight. When something instinctively happens, for instance, you're driving and then somebody cuts you off, you either slow down. It also enhances your learning capabilities. So that's good stress because it stretches out your mental bandwidth. It makes you remember things instinctively. It helps you practice from short-term to long-term memory. When you're stretched out, or like mental cognitive stress would be when you're taking a test, or if you're a server in a restaurant, new to the restaurant. And bad acute stress is going to be irritability. You're irritable to somebody. You're probably passive aggressive because you don't like an individual. Social anxiety, as people say. You don't know the environment or the landscape. You're entering a new environment, so you probably feel a little bit of stress. And then that results into either a tight stomach, clammy hands. You could experience shortness of breath for a little bit. And like I said, social avoidance. So you just don't want to you're dodging all these social interactions. I actually have to practice the tips that I'm about to share with you that I use daily to calm myself, get me into a grounded state of being, so I don't essentially make errors, aka fuck up. A metaphor could be used for your work. If you work in an office, okay, and you have stress with talking to a boss, you can use these practices to calm yourself, finish that report, finish that whatever activity or a deadline that you have to complete in a tranquil and more cohesive and concise way. Versus long-term stress, where long-term stress could be things of an unhealthy environment at work, at your crib, at your house, with a friend, and something that is sustained for a longer period of time to it. The short-term acute stress could cause symptoms as well, but it's much more beneficial because it sometimes can give you this drive, inertia, internal motivation, or internal will to take action. Then again, short-term stress is the response of fight or flight. That's good, but over an extensive period of time, you'll experience mental fatigue, body fatigue, irritability in your relationships, inability to focus, fogginess or lack of clarity. So stay tuned so you could develop the skills, baby, to be resilient to stress and be closer to mastering yourself. And the tips that I use to manage short-term stress, okay? That acute stress that I've been talking about, okay? The tip number one is breathing, okay? Now, if you're new to breathing, practice this over here. Just 3 cycles of 1 minute breathing in and then breathing out. This is how you build it up. You breathe in for 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 9 seconds, depends your lung capacity. You hold it for the same amount of time, and then you exhale, okay? exhale for the same amount of time, and you hold your breath. You want to do this cycle. They call this, I believe, the pranayama breathing cycle. It's tip number 2, okay, which is very important, is space. Provide yourself space with whatever external stress that you're experiencing. And if you're experiencing internal stress, you could get yourself away from that. You could take yourself out of the environment, take yourself out to the beach, take yourself out to something that's new. That's an internal way of relieving yourself from stress. But we're just talking about external here. So when you're experiencing external stressors or external acute stress, aka short-term stress, give yourself space. Take some time to take a step back. Give yourself space from that stress. Tell the individual that's providing that stress to give you a minute to process what's happening, and that you could get back to them. Now, if you're experiencing stress that you can't get away from, what you could internally give yourself space and disassociate yourself from the environment. Now, this takes practice, because you could go off the wall with this and disassociate with your environment so much that you don't know what's taking place and you don't really care what's taking place. That could lead into unhealthy situations. But you could mentally transport yourself to a tranquil place by visualizing a peaceful place, and doing the breath work that I just told you about, and just focusing on your breath. Now, that number 3 is embracement. You got to embrace the stress. Sometimes if you really can't get out of your stress or the environment, you just have to embrace it and understand that it's just a short-term stress. It is only a short moment of time that you're going to experience that stress. Now, it's very difficult because there are so many variables that could take place in a short-term stress scenario, because there's so many variables. It could be a short-term like drive-by, or it could be a short-term fight. You know, both of those short-term acute stresses are very different levels. But and you just embrace that, you know, everything is an ebb and flow. Everything, when there's an up, there's a down. When there's a left, there's a right. When there's light, there's darkness. You have to understand that at the end of the day, not everything could be good. So you have to experience stress so you could actually mentally, cognitively, emotionally stretch your bandwidth. It places you in a high anxious environment, but when you embrace it, you're like, okay, what do I gotta do to make sure I'm safe? You just gotta embrace it. You gotta embrace the stress. So number 1 is breathing, those breathing practices that I told you about. Number 2 is gonna be about that space. You gotta give yourself some space, either externally or internally. And then number 3 is going to be embracement. Quite difficult to do if you're new to this, but once you start embracing these stressors and understand that's just part of life, that's where you start building your resiliency to stress and start coping and managing stress.
Now we're stepping into chronic stress, okay, as quoted by the American Psychological Association, is the level of stress being constantly and persistent over a long period of time.
You know, these chronic stresses over a long periods of time affect your body, man. They affect your mental state, and they affect your spiritual state.
The causes of those
Stress could be a dissatisfied life. Maybe you're broken and you're overly stressed of the bills that you have. You have internal turmoil, so you have unresolved trauma that you have carried over from your childhood, from your teenage years, from your early adolescence, depending the stage of life you are in. A draining relationship, then the list goes on. It's unhealthy diet, which you could be a drug abuser.
Now that we went over influences that may cause chronic stress, now I'm just gonna go over a couple of the symptoms that comes from chronic stress that I've experienced, both mental, physical. I might go into spiritual, who knows, maybe that'll be a bonus, but stay tuned, check it out.
Muscle tension, tension in your neck, tension in certain places of your body, potentially giving you signs and avoid responsibilities, aka you binge eat, you binge watch, you binge clean, you know, justifying that it's good for your environmental state, but you avoid your major responsibilities, and cognitively fatigued, lack of focus, lack of clarity. Physical symptoms, maybe you have high cholesterol. So chronic stress looks different for us all. That's chronic stress. let's talk about tips on how we could talk managing long-term stress for you.
Yo, 3 lifestyle tips over here to help you grapple with long-term stress. Okay, so number 1 is gonna be physical activity. Okay, I feel like chronic stress is just pent up energy. All right, and you know, when it comes to physical activity, I could give you a list of things. I'm not going to tell you to go to the gym. The first and foremost thing is realizing where you're at. All right, physical activity level wise. If you're not very physical, the best thing I could tell you, which I practice as part of my morning routine, is walking. Getting out and walking. Okay, what I mean is implementing 10 minutes of walking into your life is just go out, get some sunlight. If you're in an environment that's not conducive to going out, because I lived in Boston for 6 years and it snows and rains and hails in Boston, and it always rains during hurricane season, or it's extra too hot in Miami. I understand what you might make up an excuse to not getting out. You can walk around the house. Create a space for yourself to get out and about. Go on the flight of stairs. Another one could be practicing yoga. These things are just basic things that you could do. That's tip number 1. Any type of physical activity. Might it be walking, might it be yoga, might it be just breathing, might it be going to the gym, or might it be just body workout, anything. Tip number 2 is going to be meditative practices. Now again, similar to tip number 1 from acute or short-term stress, is going to be meditative practices. But when I talk about meditative practices for long-term chronic stress management or stress management, this is what I mean about a lifestyle. You got to practice this on the daily or every other day.
Short-term tips that I told you about are just to relieve those temporary stressors real quick, just to get you back to homeostasis or a grounded level. Long-term meditational practice are things that are going to last more than 5 minutes. Now, to clarify, meditational practices could be anything that fits for you, but the general definition of meditational practices, anything that gets you in a state of connection with yourself, and allows you to not worry about anything else. So right now, I'm just going to demonstrate to you an example of what meditational practice to implement in your life for long-term stress will be. Now remember, you got to practice this daily. But so stay tuned. This is the example, baby. Check it out.
Breathing in, and then 1 minute breathing out, and then advance to breathing in, holding it for breathing in for 4 seconds, breathing out, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, and then holding my exhalation for 4 seconds. I graduated, and now my meditative practices is about 30 minutes long. I'll have 3 cycles of 3 different postures of meditation. One is going to be sitting down. I do that for 5 minutes, breathing in, breathing out. They breathe in for 6, hold for 6, exhale for 6, and then exhale and hold that exhalation for 6, and I continue that for 5 minutes. Then my second cycle is going to be on a sitting squat pose. It's good. I do that for 5 minutes, same breathing exercise. You would call it a sumo squat meditative pose. I stand there for 5 minutes, same breathing exercises. That third tip to be cognitive reconstructing. So essentially, cognitive reconstructing, which you do by the practice of journaling, which is a video that I'm going to right here in the details down below, is essentially what I would like to say what Jay Shetty has talked about in his book Think Like a Monk, and is essentially bringing awareness to your thoughts. Okay, and then taking stock of what triggers you and what irritates you. So when you are irritated, the thoughts that pop up, what are those? First off, what are the thoughts that are popping up? Secondly, what are causing those thoughts, right? And then thirdly, you want to observe those thoughts and reflect on what resonates with you and what doesn't. Are those intrusive thoughts for you, or up from you, or are those intrusive thoughts from external environments? Media, your family, your friends, your social environment trying to tell you who you have to be, what you got to be, what you got to think. Essentially, you got to decipher between that. and which is why I talk about journaling, because that helps you decipher. Yeah. So once you take stock of those, once you take stock of that inventory, intrusive thoughts, and what triggers those intrusive thoughts or those behaviors, you reflect on your notes and see what evidence supports those thoughts. And then on another note, you want to come up with evidence that doesn't support those thoughts. You want to come up with some evidence that, aka compliments that people have provided to you. Once you come up with evidences that support the thoughts and evidences that doesn't support your thoughts, you want to come up with alternative and balanced thoughts, non-judgmental perspective to these thoughts. So journaling practices help you. It's one of the tools used in cognitive restructuring technique that is part of cognitive behavioral therapy, coined by Carl Jung. And with these three tips, that physical activity, mindful practice, and journaling for cognitive restructuring, you're touching your body, you're touching your mind, and you're touching your soul. Okay, with all those three elements, and with consistency, you start better managing and reconstructing your perception to stress management.
So we went over the differences between acute stress and chronic stress, aka short-term stress, long-term stress. Gave you definitions of them, gave you symptoms of them, gave you tips of them. And now I feel like this is where the part where I got to tell you the most important part is these three variables that you have to consider. There is time, self-awareness, and commitment. When I tell time, how much time do I have? So how much, just take a step back and be like, okay, where do I have time to start implementing these practices? That's motherfucking number one. Number two is self-awareness, baby. You gotta have self-awareness. Take that time, allocate that time. Once you pinpoint the time that you have, you wanna self-evaluate, take stock, have a self-inventory that I told you. Use journaling practices. This is your opportunity to take inventory of what the fuck is going on in your mind. Like number three, we're rolling into number three now, which is commitment. You got to be committed to this shit. You feel me? You have to promise yourself. You have to build that relationship with yourself. You have to take time and see where you're at in life. Are you in a relationship or are you single? Do you have a profession? Are you in your profession? Are you in the beginning or in the middle? Or where are you right now? What variables do you have? Do you have to maintain a mortgage or are you just paying rent? Same shit. You just owning one and the other one you're not. Or not? Are you spending all your time on seeking external stimulus? You feel me? That you got to take stock of that. Once you take stock of that time, then you start bringing self-awareness by the practices of journaling. Okay, that cognitive reconstructing that, and then commitment. Commitment means you're doing it. You promise yourself an X amount of days. I wouldn't want to start off every single day because I did do that. Didn't like it. So I did every other day. I have many different type of experimentations for myself, and now I'm at the point where I don't like not journaling for more than 2 to 3 days. If I pass 3 days of not journaling, I'm not feeling right, and I have transitioned that from not liking fucking journaling, not writing anything, to now it being like water to me. Like I have to expel whatever it's in my brain. I do that in the mornings. I've been doing it at night times now. I think it's better to do it at nighttime because then you could go to sleep a little bit much more mentally relinquished. I feel like when you write down or talk about your things right before going to sleep, you kind of let things go and you have a more restful sleep. That's just a theory, I'm just saying. But those are the three most important variables that I feel like you really gotta narrow down on. Exactly. Number one, that variable time. Number two, that self-awareness. Be very self-aware of the thoughts. Practice the journaling. Look at over time. Remember, over time, you're going to gather data on yourself, which is building a relationship with yourself and seeing the thought patterns that pass by, maybe repetitive things that continually pop up, or maybe you write down maybe you get very introspective and journal about your experience of the day. Many people have different ways. Number three is that commitment. You got to be committed to it, which means you got to be consistent. Commitment means that you're showing up consistently. So it could be every 2-3 days. If you're start off like every 3 days, every 2 days. If you're intermediate or advanced, do it every day. If you're advanced, you should be doing it like twice a day. I'm telling you that because I'm telling myself that, but call it 6 tips. But we'll just see it 3 tips for chronic stress and 3 tips for acute stress. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor. Do me that favor and leave accountability down in the comments, okay? Leave accountability down in the comments. And if you're just starting off your journey, reach out to me on Instagram, okay? Reach out to me on Instagram. And I know the feeling of being self-accountable and not living up to the milestones that you place upon yourself. So having an external accountability, aka accountability buddy, might it be your friend, might it be your family member, maybe you reach out to me. I know how it is. Leave me a comment down below or holla at me on my IG over here. Accountability partner, so we could chop it up. See,
It's your boy Christian, aka Cannawinee, and welcome to my channel. Here I blend professional and personal development tips tailored for introverts to better manage their personal and professional growth. Back in 2023 marked my 10 years since starting my personal spiritual development journey and 6 years in the wine industry. So here I share tips, insights, and systems that has enriched and brought value to my life and journey. Subscribe and tap that notification button to discover how you can balance your life and thrive with the guidance designed to resonate and deeply inspire actions that has helped me in my life. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the love. Cannawinee out. Shoot! Enjoy.
Ciao, 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 ciao.